Well, we'll wind up, as per schedule, with Murray Rothbard, Dr. Rothbard from the United States.
I'm going to keep it in 10 minutes. It's going to be difficult because the prospects for libertarianism keep getting better and better every year, and so I keep adding more and more stuff to my speech on it. At any rate, it seems evident to everybody in the United States, I think, that there's been enormous change in public opinion and intellectual climate among academia and the general public and the media about libertarianism. In other words, that the ideas have caught on in such ways that we could never have hoped for 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So within the last 5 years, there's been a tremendous acceleration of interest and a favorable interest in as I say, in these circles, in academia and the general public, among intellectuals generally too, of interest in libertarianism. So that the same people who would say 20 years ago that you're crazy and or a fascist now say, well, gee, I agree with a lot of that, but it really won't work, which is, of course, a fantastic change for the better. The big thing, of course, this year that happened in the United States was the glorious tax revolt, the victory of Proposition 13 in California, which has sparked a tremendous wave of interest and enthusiasm throughout the country. The thing about Proposition 13, which was a call for 60% property tax cut, it also said in there that you can't increase, the state legislature or local governments could not increase taxes to compensate unless, on the local level, 2/3 of the qualified voters would approve of it. In other words, 2/3 of the registered voters. Since usually only half the voters show up, it would be very unlikely to do that. And the state legislature, 2/3 of the state legislature have to agree to any state increase in state taxes. So this is a fantastically rigorous amendment. Several years ago in California, they tried a milk and water, a milk toast tax limitation amendment, which only called for limiting the increase of taxes in the future, increase of spending in the future, and that was beaten by the organized forces of the ruling class in the United States and California, namely the bureaucrats and their allies. And whereas this time, the interesting thing is, 3 weeks before the election, the polls had a nip and tuck, just about even. Then the organized ruling class, the establishment, put on a fantastic scare campaign, as they usually do. This means all the media, all newspapers, magazines, TV and radio, etc., plus big business, which contributed heavily against this tax cut. And the forces in favor of the tax cut had no money and no organization, almost no organization. Right? And so day after day, hour after hour, they kept pounding away. The establishment kept pounding away. If you cut taxes like this, the police will disappear, the courts will disappear, the fire department will disappear, your public library books will go up in smoke, the schools will disappear, chaos will have no local government, everything will be chaos. And as they did it, the fantastic, phenomenal, and wondrous thing is that as they did this, public opinion swung fantastically in favor of it. As if to say, nuts to you, we've heard this junk before. And we wound up 3 weeks later with a 2-1, 4 million to 2 million vote. 2-1 vote in favor of Proposition 13, which scared the bejesus out of the politicians. Not only in California, but also all throughout the country. They got the message very, very quickly. My friend libertarian Roy Childs debated before the election in Northern California with the head of Common Cause in that area. Common Cause is a very establishment, extremely beloved by the media organization, run by the Rockefeller interests. And he was attacking Proposition 13. He first attacked Roy for being a tool of big business, at which point Roy said, "How dare you say that when you're financed by the Rockefellers?" That shut him up on that. And then, at the end, desperate and clinging to the ropes, the Common Cause person said, "This guy over here, he's not just in favor of Proposition 13, he's against all government." At which point the entire audience broke out in a great cheer. That's the climate of opinion as it's surging onward in the United States. It's magnificent. And so as soon as Proposition 13 was passed, groups throughout the country in every state began to rally to the banner. And New York City, which has never been the home of tax rebellion, to say the least, one of the leading newspaper in New York City had a clipping, a poll saying, check off the following things. Which are you in favor of? Are you in favor of drastic income tax cuts, drastic sales tax cuts, drastic property tax cuts, all three, or just keep the tax level about where it is, clip it and send it in the paper. They only ran it for 3 or 4 days because we had one of the innumerable newspaper strikes in New York, and I cut that off. But the point is, during those 3 or 4 days, several 100,000 people took the trouble of sending the coupons in, every one of whom said drastic cuts across the board, and also included angry letters attacking taxes, which they didn't have to do. It's the spontaneous outpouring of opinion. So we have the tax rebellion, I think, growing national, and in every state, and the prospects are fantastic on that. And the thing is, see, if you just cut taxes, you don't have to start arguing about should we cut the mental health programs and all that. Let them worry about what they cut, because we'll cut their water off. Okay, so that was in addition to that, which is the major tax rebellion in the United States. There's also the Kemp-Roth bill, a national bill, which has gotten a great deal of support for 30% across-the-board income tax cut, which is very substantial, growing support for that. The Steiger bill, which calls for a cut of the capital gains tax in half, which has already gotten about 2/3 of the senators to endorse the bill, which is phenomenal. And the idea of tax credits for private school tuition, meaning taking the tuition right off the top, not tax deduction, but tax credit. That passed the House of Representatives, even though it's been stopped by the Senate. So the point is, this sort of thing, which could never have been even conceived of even 2-3 years ago, is now germinating. What happened, by the way, when the tax revolt occurred, when the Proposition 13 passed, that evening, to show how politicians react, that evening Governor Brown, who had done his best to stop it, with almost hysterical attacks on it, went on television and immediately said, Proposition 13 is following, I originated it. Not only is it following my view, but I originated the whole concept. So the politicians are scrambling to get on the tax cut bandwagon. Okay, in addition to that, there's a great movement for deregulation, which I think has been talked about already here. The CAB has been effectively almost deregulated. It's the Civil Aeronautics Board. The economist who's the head of it has publicly announced in magazine interviews that his great objective is, the day he leaves office, to also announce the liquidation of the CAB. And the Van Deerlen Committee of the House of Representatives has issued a report calling almost for deregulation of the Federal Communications Commission, providing property rights in the channel and TV channels and radio frequencies. I'm not saying it's going to go through, but the fact that a very prestigious committee headed by a liberal Democrat has proposed this is extremely important. Okay, in addition to that, almost 2 minutes, the public is also not only fed up with inflation, which they've been a long time, but they now identify inflation as somehow connected, one, with the federal deficits, and two, with the money supply. It's very difficult now for the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates by pumping more money in, because as soon as they do it, the market raises interest rates, and they anticipate more inflation as they're watching the money supply figures. So inflation is becoming counterproductive for the government itself, even. The stagflation phenomenon, the idea of inflationary recession with heavy unemployment along with inflation, has totally clobbered the Keynesians. I mean, the Keynesians are dead from the neck up. I mean, they can't understand it. They can't explain it. They cling to their university posts, of course, and their government posts. But the point is, they've lost their nerve for power. They've lost their will to power, in a sense. They've lost their nerve, which is one of the great anticipations of victory, getting rid of them. The public school system, going another completely different area, formerly beloved, unbelievably beloved in the United States, is now disliked by almost everybody. It's now recognized the public school system creates class conflict, social conflict, because whichever you decide, in any controversial area, whether to have progressive or traditional education, sex education or not, integration or segregation or whatever. Whichever you decide, some group of parents and children can be hurt. And so this is becoming more and more evident too. Compulsory morality laws are broken down to the extent that they're virtually not enforced. Pornography laws, sex laws, censorship, marijuana prohibition, etc. They're virtually broken down because people realize they can't enforce them. And finally, Watergate, a very important phenomenon. That's not just because of superficial problem with President Nixon. A very important phenomenon because the result of Watergate was to totally desanctify the presidency, the institution of the presidency, which had been becoming very dangerous because the public began to think of the president as sovereign. And Bill Buckley, in the National Review, when the Watergate first began, wrote a column saying we shouldn't go into this too far because the president in our Constitution is sovereign. Unbelievable statement. But anyway, that was the general opinion. Now nobody considers the president sovereign. Every politician is regarded with total hostility and suspicion. And it's generally assumed by every American every politician is a crook until proven otherwise. And so it's a very healthy climate because they can't get away with much. For a while I thought that Jimmy Carter would be able to rectify this. As a matter of fact, when Jimmy Carter, the great argument for Carter was that he would restore, quote, the faith of people in their government, unquote. And he did a pretty good job for a few months with his cardigan sweaters and his born-again rhetoric and his phony smile. But that lasted only a few months, and his popularity is now almost the lowest in history after only a fairly short time in power. So, those are the objective conditions for the reason why I'm optimistic. Again, I'm almost no time. Huh?
Another minute and a half.
Another minute and a half. And as far as the libertarian movement goes, to take advantage of these fantastically optimistic conditions, the movement is growing by leaps and bounds all the time. There are so many newsletters and magazines that I can't keep up with them, which is it's a great event. There are institutions, foundations, lobbying groups, Austrian economic scholars, and libertarian philosophers popping up all over the place. In addition to that, the political arm of the movement, Libertarian Party, has been growing phenomenally. Roger McBride here got 180,000 votes in the last election, 1976, which is by far greater than any other so-called minor party. As a matter of fact, we're now listed by the Congressional Quarterly as the third major party in the United States. So it's been growing fantastically. The media is extremely interested, and so they're giving us a lot of publicity. And the Barron Report, which is a very highly prestigious political newsletter, run not by a libertarian but by a former McGovern administrative assistant, said recently that the trend in the United States throughout the country is toward libertarianism, which he identified as libertarianism, on all questions, economic and social. And so, this election, this November, we're running Ed Clark for governor of California. He got 160,000 signatures on his petition, which is phenomenal. It's almost unprecedented in California. And in Alaska, we're hoping to elect 2 state representatives. So I think we're going fantastically well. I think the prospects are excellent. And I just want to say one thing more. We've heard a lot of doom and gloom here this week. And I think the doom and gloom comes from the fact that many conservatives are always pessimistic, because conservatives identify the main enemy as the masses, the general public. Short of repealing universal suffrage, they naturally are doomed. As libertarians, however, I think we should identify the main enemy as the state, not the public. The state is ripping the public off, to use an American idiom. The state is exploiting the public. And the public, therefore, should be libertarian, and I think is increasingly becoming such. Thank you very much.